The HOA Karen, who attacked my wife at our cabin, had no idea I was the one who built the HOA into existence, and what happened next would haunt her for years to come. It was supposed to be a peaceful weekend getaway. Sarah was 7 months pregnant, glowing despite the morning sickness that still plagued her, and we'd driven up to our mountain cabin to escape the city heat. We'd been trying for a baby for 4 years, and this pregnancy felt like a miracle we both desperately needed to protect. I was unloading our bags when I heard Sarah scream. Not the playful shriek of someone being splashed with cold water, but a genuine cry of terror that sent ice through my veins. I dropped everything and sprinted toward the sound, my heart hammering against my ribs. What I found made my blood boil. A woman I'd never seen before, short, stocky, with steel-gray hair pulled into an aggressive bun, had my pregnant wife backed against our car. Sarah's hands were protectively cradled around her belly, tears streaming down her face, while this stranger jabbed her finger inches from Sarah's nose. "You people have no right to be here." The woman was shrieking, spittle flying from her lips. "I'm the HOA president, and I'm telling you to get out before I have you arrested for trespassing." "Ma'am, please," Sarah was saying, her voice shaking. "This is our cabin. We own it. I can show you the deed. I don't care what fake papers you have." The woman's face was purple with rage. No unauthorized visitors are allowed in this community without proper clearance from the board. That's when I saw her shove my wife. Not a gentle push, a full two-handed shove that sent Sarah stumbling backward into the car door. The metallic thud of her body hitting the vehicle echoed through the mountain air like a gunshot. Everything went red. "Get your hands off my wife," I roared, closing the distance between us in 3 massive strides. The woman whipped around, her eyes wild and unfocused like a rabid animal. Up close, I could see the veins bulging in her neck, the way her lips curled back from her teeth in a snarl that belonged on something feral. "And who the hell are you supposed to be?" she spat, getting right up in my face without an ounce of fear. "Another one of these freeloaders trying to use property they don't belong on?" I am 6'4" and built like a linebacker from my construction days. But this woman, who couldn't have been more than 5'2", stood her ground like she owned the world. The sheer audacity was almost impressive. "Almost?" "I'm her husband," I said through gritted teeth, fighting every instinct to physically remove her from our property. "And you just assaulted my pregnant wife on land that we own." She laughed, actually laughed, a harsh, grating sound like nails on a chalkboard. "Own? You people don't own anything here. I've been the president of this HOA for 2 years, and I know every single property owner in this community. You're trespassers, and I'm calling the police." Sarah was still pressed against the car, both hands on her belly, her face pale as moonlight. I could see her lips moving in what looked like a prayer, and the sight of my strong, capable wife reduced to cowering against our own vehicle made something savage unfurl in my chest. "Call them," I said, pulling out my phone. "In fact, let me save you the trouble." But she was already dialing, her stubby fingers flying over the keypad with practiced ease. As she raised the phone to her ear, she fixed me with a look of pure triumph. "Yes, this is Patricia Hendricks, HOA president for Pine Ridge Mountain Community," she said into the phone, never breaking eye contact with me. "I need officers immediately. We have trespassers who are becoming violent and threatening. 2 individuals, 1 male, 1 female. The male is large and aggressive." "Sarah?" I was at her side in an instant, my anger replaced by cold terror. "Baby, what's wrong?" "Something's not right," she whispered, her face scrunched in pain. "It hurts. Something's really not right." The ambulance arrived before the police. Sitting in that hospital waiting room, watching Sarah's pale face through the emergency room window, I realized Patricia Hendricks had no idea who she'd just declared war on. She thought she was dealing with some random weekend warrior who'd stumbled onto her territory. She had no clue she'd just attacked the wife of the man who built Pine Ridge Mountain Community from nothing but raw wilderness and a vision. 15 years ago, I was a different person. Fresh out of college, with a civil engineering degree and a chip on my shoulder the size of Colorado. My construction company had just landed its first major contract, and I was hungry to prove myself in a world that seemed designed to crush young entrepreneurs. That's when I discovered those 847 acres of untouched mountain land, tucked away in a valley that most developers considered too remote, too challenging, too expensive to develop. They were right. It was all of those things. That's exactly why I wanted it. Most importantly, I wrote every single word of the HOA bylaws and covenants myself. Every rule, every regulation, every clause about property rights and community standards, it all came from my laptop, sitting at my kitchen table at 2 in the morning, fueled by coffee and the absolute determination to create something perfect. I researched HOA law for months, consulted with 3 different attorneys, and crafted documents that would protect both individual property rights and community standards. I still owned the master deed. I still held controlling interest in the community corporation. Patricia Hendricks wasn't just wrong about my family being trespassers. She was wrong about her own authority to exist. The doctor's voice snapped me back to the present. Mr. Davidson, your wife is stable. The baby's heartbeat is strong, but we're going to keep her overnight for observation. The stress and physical impact caused some minor contractions, but everything looks good. Relief flooded through me like warm water, but it was quickly replaced by something colder, harder. Sarah was okay. Our baby was okay. But the woman responsible for putting them both in danger was still out there, probably celebrating her victory over the supposed trespassers. "Can I see her?" I asked. Sarah was propped up in the hospital bed, an IV drip in her arm and monitors beeping softly around her. Her eyes were red from crying, but she managed a weak smile when she saw me. "The baby?" she whispered. "Fine. You're both going to be fine." I took her hand, feeling how cold her fingers were. "I'm so sorry, Sarah. I should have been there sooner. I should have protected you." That was the question, wasn't it? I'd been tracking every property sale in Pine Ridge for years, partly out of professional interest, and partly because I still felt protective of the community I'd built. New residents usually introduced themselves, especially to longtime neighbors. But Patricia Hendricks had appeared out of nowhere, claiming authority she didn't possess. "I don't know yet," I told Sarah. "But I'm going to find out." What I discovered over the next few hours, making phone calls from the hospital corridor, chilled me to the bone. Patricia had moved into the community 6 months ago, purchasing a foreclosed property at auction. Within weeks, she'd been showing up to the monthly HOA meetings that had been mostly ceremonial for years, since we had such a tight-knit, respectful community. But Patricia had turned those meetings into her personal power theater. She'd somehow convinced the handful of regular attendees to elect her as president, though according to the bylaws I'd written, the position held no executive authority without board approval, a board that didn't technically exist because we'd never needed one. She'd been using her fake authority to harass residents, impose fines for imaginary violations, and worst of all, she'd been collecting those fines into her personal account. The woman wasn't just a bully, she was a con artist who'd found the perfect target in our trusting mountain community. My phone buzzed with a text from my neighbor Jim Morrison. "Hey Dave, heard there was trouble at your place today. That Hendricks woman is telling everyone she had you arrested for trespassing. Says she's having your property seized by the HOA. Thought you should know." I stared at the message, feeling something dangerous crystallize in my chest. Patricia Hendricks thought she'd won. She thought she'd successfully driven off some random troublemaker and could now brag about her victory to the community I'd built with my own hands. She had no idea what was coming. I waited until the next morning to make my move. Sarah was discharged with strict orders to rest, and I'd arranged for her sister to stay with her while I handled what needed handling. Some battles require strategy, not rage, and Patricia Hendricks was about to learn the difference. I found her exactly where I expected, standing in the community center parking lot, clipboard in hand, lecturing poor Mrs. Chen about her unauthorized flower garden. Mrs. Chen was 83 years old, had lived in Pine Ridge for 12 years, and grew the most beautiful roses I'd ever seen. Watching this woman berate her made my jaw clench, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Excuse me, Patricia." She spun around, her eyes immediately narrowing when she recognized me. Up close, in daylight, I could see she was younger than I'd initially thought, maybe 55, with the kind of aggressive energy that comes from years of pushing people around and getting away with it. "Well, well," she sneered, crossing her arms over her chest. "I thought the police would have explained property law to you yesterday. This is a restricted community, and you have no business being here." Mrs. Chen looked between us nervously, clutching her gardening shears. I gave her a reassuring nod. "It's okay, Mrs. Chen. Patricia and I just need to have a quick conversation about community policies." "Don't you dare dismiss her!" Patricia's voice rose to that familiar shriek. "Mrs. Chen needs to understand that her little flower project is in direct violation of landscaping ordinances. I've already issued her a citation and a fine." I pulled out my phone and opened the original HOA documents, the ones I'd written word by word. "Which ordinance specifically?" "I'd love to review the exact language." Patricia's eyes flashed with triumph. She yanked out her own phone, scrolling through what looked like a hastily assembled document. Section 12, subsection 4. No landscaping modifications without written approval from the HOA board. Mrs. Chen never submitted the proper forms. Interesting. I kept my voice level, conversational. "Can you tell me who's on this board that approved your authority to issue citations?" "I am the board," she snapped. "As elected president, I have full executive authority over all community standards and violations." Mrs. Chen was backing away now, clearly wanting to escape whatever was building between us. I didn't blame her. Even I could feel the electricity in the air, that moment before a storm breaks. "Patricia, I think there's been a misunderstanding. You see, according to the actual HOA bylaws, the legally binding ones filed with the county, the president position is purely ceremonial, unless there's a sitting board of at least 5 members. And even then, no individual has unilateral authority to issue fines or citations." Her face was turning that familiar shade of purple. "I don't need some weekend visitor explaining HOA law to me. I've been running this community for 2 years, and I know exactly what my authority is." "2 years?" I raised an eyebrow. "That's interesting, because the property records show you only purchased your home 6 months ago. Which property management company were you working with before that?" For just a moment, a split second, I saw something flicker across her face. Uncertainty, fear. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by renewed aggression. "My background is none of your business." She stepped closer, that finger coming up to jab toward my chest. "What I know is that you and your wife attacked me yesterday, threatened me, and now you're harassing me again. I want you off this property immediately, or I'm calling the police again." I didn't move, didn't flinch. Just looked down at this woman who thought volume and intimidation could substitute for actual authority. "By all means, call them. But first, let me ask you something. When you were elected as president, who exactly voted for you? What was the quorum? Were the proper notices sent out according to the bylaws? Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Behind that bluster, I could see her scrambling, trying to figure out how much I actually knew. The meeting was properly conducted according to all regulations. I don't have to justify my position to some trespasser. Trespasser, I let the word hang in the air between us. Patricia, I need you to understand something very clearly. Yesterday, you physically assaulted my pregnant wife. You caused her to be hospitalized. You filed a false police report. And now, you're doubling down by continuing to claim authority you don't possess. I have every right to protect this community from people like you. Her voice was getting higher, more desperate. I know exactly what you are criminals looking for, an easy target, thinking you can intimidate a woman living alone. That's when I realized what I was really dealing with. This wasn't just about power or money, though those were certainly factors. Patricia Hendricks was genuinely unhinged, living in a fantasy where she was the heroic protector of a community under siege. In her twisted worldview, she wasn't the villain. She was the victim, bravely standing against dangerous invaders, which made her infinitely more dangerous than a simple con artist. Patricia, I said quietly, I want you to think very carefully about your next move. Yesterday was assault. Today, you're admitting to fraud and harassment. Every word you say is digging you deeper into a hole that's going to be very difficult to climb out of. She laughed, that same harsh sound from yesterday. Are you threatening me? Because I have witnesses. She gestured wildly around the empty parking lot. Everyone in this community knows what you are, and they support me 100%. I pulled out my business card, the one from my development company, with my name clearly printed as CEO and founder of Davidson Construction and Development. I think you should take a closer look at who you're really dealing with, Patricia. And then I think you should consider an apology. She snatched the card from my hand, her eyes scanning it quickly. I watched her face as the pieces slowly clicked into place. The company name, the address, the timeline. For a moment, genuine fear flickered across her features. Then she tore the card in half and threw the pieces at my feet. I don't care who you think you are. This is my community now, and I'm not going anywhere. Dave, it was Jim Morrison, my neighbor for over a decade. His voice sounded strained, uncomfortable. I hate to bother you, but Patricia came by yesterday with some concerning information about your family. I was standing in my kitchen, watching Sarah through the window as she read peacefully in the garden, one hand resting on her growing belly. The sight of her finally relaxed after days of stress should have been calming. Instead, I felt my blood pressure spike. She says you and Sarah are involved in some kind of rental scam. That you're not really the owners of your cabin, just long-term squatters who've been forging documents. She showed me what she claimed were the real property records, saying the actual owners hired her to evict you. I closed my eyes and counted to 5. Jim, you've known me for 10 years. You've seen my family's property deed. You were at our housewarming party when we first built the cabin. Of course, Dave. I know it's nonsense. But she's not just telling me. She's going door to door, house to house with this story. And some of the newer residents who don't know you as well. They're starting to ask questions. That was just the beginning. The worst part? She was good at it. I've lived in HOA communities for 25 years, she told them, her voice dripping with manufactured authority. I've seen this pattern before. Criminals target quiet, wealthy neighborhoods like ours because they know you're too polite to ask hard questions. They forge documents. They intimidate anyone who challenges them, and before you know it, they've taken over your entire community. Mrs. Patterson, who'd lived 3 houses down from us for 8 years, actually crossed the street to avoid me during my morning run. The Hendersons, who'd been to our barbecue just 2 months ago, wouldn't make eye contact when I waved from my truck. But Patricia's masterpiece was the petition. For the safety and security of Pine Ridge Mountain Community, the header read in bold, official-looking font. Below it, a carefully crafted document that painted my family as dangerous con artists who'd somehow fooled local authorities and were now threatening the entire neighborhood with their escalating violence and intimidation tactics. 47 neighbors who'd believed her lies without once picking up the phone to ask me directly what was happening. The petition was bad enough. What I discovered next made me realize Patricia wasn't just a con artist, she was a predator who'd been systematically victimizing our most vulnerable residents for months. "Mr. Davidson?" The voice on the phone was shaky, elderly. "This is Eleanor Walsh. I think I need to talk to someone about Patricia Hendricks." Eleanor was 91 years old, lived alone in a beautiful cottage on the north side of the community, and had been one of my first property buyers 15 years ago. She'd always been sharp as a tack, but her voice now carried the weight of genuine fear. "She came to my house last month," Eleanor continued, with official-looking papers saying I owed back fees to the HOA. $700 for landscape violation assessments dating back 3 years. I've never received any notices before, but she said the HOA had been trying to contact me and I'd been ignoring the letters. My hands clenched around the phone. "Eleanor, there are no landscape violation fees in our HOA. There never have been." That's what I thought, but she showed me the bylaws, or what she said were the bylaws. They looked so official, Mr. Davidson. And she said if I didn't pay immediately, the HOA could place a lion on my property and force me into foreclosure. The picture was becoming clearer and uglier. Patricia hadn't just been playing pretend president for her ego. She'd been running a sophisticated scam, targeting elderly residents who were less likely to question official-looking documents or fight back against intimidation. "Did you pay her, Eleanor?" A long pause. $700 cash. She said checks weren't accepted for violation payments. I was so scared of losing my home. Eleanor wasn't the only one. Over the next few days, I discovered Patricia had collected thousands of dollars in fake fees from at least 6 different elderly residents. Landscape violations, parking infractions, architectural review fees, all complete fiction, but backed up with forged documents and delivered with enough official authority to terrify people into compliance. The genius of her scheme was that she'd targeted people who'd lived in other HOA communities with legitimate, strict rules. They believed these kinds of aggressive enforcement tactics were normal, even if they seemed harsh. But Patricia had made one critical mistake in her campaign against my family. She'd gotten cocky. The final straw came when she filed a formal complaint with the county sheriff's department, claiming I was operating an illegal vacation rental out of our cabin and using intimidation tactics to silence legitimate HOA concerns. She'd submitted fabricated evidence, fake rental listings with our address, doctored photos showing excessive vehicle traffic, and sworn statements from anonymous neighbors about suspicious activities. When Deputy Marshal showed up at our door with a warrant to search our property for evidence of commercial activity, I knew Patricia had crossed a line she couldn't come back from. "I'm sorry about this, Dave," he said, clearly uncomfortable. "I know you folks, and this doesn't feel right. But the complaint was detailed enough that we have to follow up." As I watched him document our completely normal family cabin, Sarah's pregnancy books on the coffee table, children's furniture we'd been assembling in the spare room, family photos covering every surface, I felt something shift inside me. I'd tried reason. I'd tried patience. I'd given Patricia multiple opportunities to back down, apologize, and fade back into whatever hole she'd crawled out of. She'd chosen escalation instead. Standing in my living room, watching a sheriff's deputy search through my wife's maternity clothes because of fabricated evidence from a con artist, I realized something important. Patricia Hendricks had never encountered someone who could match her capacity for strategic warfare. That was about to change. Time to remind Patricia exactly who built the battlefield she was trying to conquer. The morning after the sheriff's search, I made a phone call I should have made weeks earlier. Not because I was afraid of Patricia Hendricks, but because I'd underestimated just how dangerous a delusional person with fake authority could become when left unchecked. Marcus, it's Dave Davidson. I need your help. Marcus Chen wasn't just my attorney. He was the lawyer who'd helped me navigate every legal complexity when I developed Pine Ridge 15 years ago. He'd written the incorporation documents, filed the original HOA paperwork, and structured the property ownership in ways that protected both individual rights and community standards. If anyone understood the legal architecture of Pine Ridge, it was Marcus. Dave, I heard there's been some trouble up your way. Patricia Hendricks has been calling my office, claiming she needs legal representation as HOA president in a dispute with problem residents. I felt a grim smile cross my face. Did you take her case? I told her I'd need to review the community bylaws and verify her authority before representing anyone. Funny thing, when I asked her for the original incorporation documents and board election records, she got very evasive and hung up. That was Patricia's first mistake, trying to manipulate a lawyer who knew exactly what legitimate HOA authority looked like. Marcus, we need to meet today. And bring Tom Rodriguez with you. Tom Rodriguez was my original development partner and still owned a significant stake in Pine Ridge's commercial properties. More importantly, he was a forensic accountant who specialized in financial fraud cases. If Patricia had been scamming elderly residents, Tom would uncover every penny and trace every transaction. We met at Marcus's office downtown, away from Patricia's surveillance network in the community. I'd spent the morning documenting everything: the assault on Sarah, the harassment campaign, the fake citations and illegal fee collections, the forged evidence submitted to law enforcement. This is worse than I thought, Marcus said after reviewing my evidence. She's not just playing dress-up as HOA president. She's committed multiple felonies: fraud, elder abuse, filing false police reports, probably mail fraud if she's been sending fake violation notices. Tom was hunched over his laptop, running financial searches on Patricia's background. Dave, you need to see this. Patricia Hendricks has quite the history. She's pulled similar scams in at least 3 other states over the past decade. Always targets upscale communities with elderly residents. Always claims HOA or property management authority she doesn't possess. The screen showed a pattern that made my stomach turn. Phoenix, Arizona evicted from a condo complex after residents discovered she'd been collecting fake maintenance fees. Denver, Colorado prosecuted for elder fraud, but charges dropped when victims were too intimidated to testify. Spokane, Washington fled the state after property management companies filed civil suits for impersonating their representatives. She's a professional, I said quietly. This isn't her first rodeo. She's been refining this scam for years. Marcus was reading through the Pine Ridge HOA documents I'd authored 15 years ago, his finger tracing specific clauses I'd written to prevent exactly this kind of abuse. Dave, you built an incredibly solid legal foundation here. The community corporation structure, the property ownership hierarchy, the requirement for board oversight, it's all designed to prevent any single person from wielding unilateral authority. Patricia's entire power grab is built on legal quicksand. Tom looked up from his laptop with something approaching admiration. That's actually the beautiful part. Patricia's arrogance is going to be her downfall. She's documented everything. Every fake violation notice, every illegal fee collection, every fraudulent claim of authority. She's created a paper trail that proves her crimes beyond any reasonable doubt. Over the next hour, We crafted a legal strategy that would have made Sun Tzu proud. We weren't just going to expose Patricia, we were going to dismantle her entire operation so thoroughly that she'd never be able to run this kind of scam again. First, Marcus would file an emergency injunction with the county court, citing my legal standing as the original developer and majority stakeholder in the community corporation. This would immediately invalidate any authority Patricia claimed and freeze all her HOA-related activities. Second, Tom would submit a formal complaint to the State Attorney General's office, documenting the pattern of elder fraud and providing evidence from Patricia's previous scams in other states. This wasn't just about Pine Ridge, this was about stopping a serial predator. Third, we'd coordinate with the county sheriff's department to file criminal charges for every crime Patricia had committed: assault on Sarah, fraud against elderly residents, filing false police reports, impersonating official authority. But the masterpiece of our strategy was the community meeting I was planning. Patricia has spent weeks poisoning the community against my family with lies, I told Marcus and Tom. She's convinced people I'm some kind of criminal squatter. Time to set the record straight. I was going to call a special community meeting using my legitimate authority as the original developer and invite every single resident to attend. Patricia would be there, of course, expecting another opportunity to rally support against the dangerous trespassers. Instead, she was going to face the truth about who she'd really been targeting. "Are you sure about this approach?" Marcus asked. "We could handle this quietly through the courts. No need for public confrontation." I thought about Sarah, still recovering from stress-induced contractions caused by Patricia's assault. I thought about Eleanor Walsh, frightened into paying $700 she couldn't afford to a con artist with fake authority. I thought about Mrs. Chen, too scared to tend her beloved roses because of fabricated violations. Patricia turned this community into her personal kingdom built on lies and fear, I said. The people she's victimized deserve to see justice done in the open. And the people she's manipulated deserve to understand exactly how they were fooled. Tom was already drafting subpoenas for Patricia's financial records, working with contacts at banks where she'd likely deposited her illegal collections. Marcus was reviewing the criminal statutes Patricia had violated, building an airtight case that would send her to prison for years. But I was planning something more immediate and more devastating than legal proceedings. Patricia Hendricks had built her power on information asymmetry. She knew things about HOA law and community governance that her victims didn't. She'd use that knowledge gap to terrorize elderly residents and manipulate well-meaning neighbors. At the community meeting, I was going to level that playing field permanently. Patricia had declared war on the wrong family, in the wrong community, at the wrong time. She'd spent weeks positioning herself as the heroic protector standing against dangerous invaders. Time to show everyone who the real invader was. And unlike Patricia's reign of terror built on lies and intimidation, my counterattack would be built on something she'd never encountered from her previous victims: the absolute, unshakable truth. The Pine Ridge Community Center had never seen a crowd like this. Every parking space was filled. Cars lined the mountain road for a quarter-mile in each direction, and residents I hadn't seen in years were filing through the doors with a kind of grim anticipation usually reserved for town halls during natural disasters. Patricia had done her work well. In the 3 days since I'd announced the emergency community meeting, she'd been working overtime to rally her supporters, telling everyone that this was the showdown where the criminal trespassers would finally be exposed and driven from the community. She'd promised them justice. She was about to get it. I arrived early with Sarah, who'd insisted on coming, despite her doctor's recommendations to avoid stress. Marcus and Tom flanked us like bodyguards, both carrying briefcases full of evidence that would reshape everyone's understanding of the past 2 months. "You sure you're ready for this?" Sarah whispered as we took seats in the front row. Before I could answer, Patricia made her entrance. She swept through the doors like a queen arriving at her coronation, wearing what looked like an expensive business suit and carrying a leather portfolio that practically screamed official authority. Behind her came her inner circle, a handful of newer residents who'd bought into her narrative completely and seemed genuinely convinced they were about to witness the triumph of law and order over criminal chaos. The community center was packed beyond capacity. I saw faces I recognized from 15 years of neighborhood barbecues and Christmas parties, but also plenty of people I'd never met, newer residents who only knew me as the alleged criminal Patricia had been warning them about for weeks. Patricia positioned herself at the podium like she owned it, that familiar aggressive smile playing across her lips as she surveyed her kingdom. When her eyes found mine, I saw pure, malicious triumph. "Thank you all for coming tonight," she began, her voice carrying that false authority I'd come to despise. "I know many of you have been concerned about recent security issues in our community, and I want you to know that your HOA board has been working tirelessly to address these threats." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Several people glanced toward me and Sarah, and I could feel the weight of suspicion and fear Patricia had cultivated so carefully. "As your elected president, I've discovered that we have individuals living among us who have been using fraudulent documents to pose as legitimate property owners. These people have engaged in intimidation, harassment, and even physical violence when their criminal activities were exposed." Mrs. Patterson was nodding vigorously. The Hendersons were staring at me like I might pull a weapon at any moment. Even some longtime neighbors looked uncertain, contaminated by weeks of Patricia's poison. But tonight, Patricia's voice rose with evangelical fervor. "We're going to put an end to this threat once and for all. Tonight, we're going to reclaim our community from the criminals who thought they could exploit our trust and our kindness." The applause was scattered but enthusiastic among her supporters. Patricia basked in it for a moment, then gestured toward me and Sarah with theatrical disgust. "David and Sarah Davidson claim to own property in Pine Ridge, but I have conclusive evidence that they are squatters who have been forging documents and intimidating anyone who challenges their lies. I'm calling for their immediate removal from our community and full prosecution for fraud, trespassing, and assault." That's when I stood up. The room fell dead silent. Every eye turned toward me, waiting to see how the alleged criminal would respond to these devastating accusations. I walked slowly to the podium, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. Patricia stepped aside, but I could see her practically vibrating with anticipation. She thought this was her moment of final victory. "Thank you, Patricia, for that comprehensive summary of your concerns," I said calmly. "Before we discuss property ownership and community authority, I think everyone here deserves to understand exactly what they're witnessing tonight." I opened the folder. Marcus had prepared copies of documents that would shatter Patricia's entire fabricated reality. "My name is David Davidson. 15 years ago, I purchased 847 acres of raw mountain wilderness and spent 3 years of my life turning it into Pine Ridge Mountain Community. I personally surveyed every lot, designed every road, and wrote every word of the HOA bylaws that Patricia claims to represent. I held up the original development documents, county records, clearly showing my name as developer and primary stakeholder. The murmurs in the room had changed tone completely. Patricia is correct that this meeting is about fraud, intimidation, and criminal activity. But she's wrong about who the criminal is. Patricia's face was changing color, shifting from triumph to confusion to something approaching panic. "Patricia Hendricks moved to Pine Ridge 6 months ago," I continued, my voice carrying to every corner of the packed room. "She has no legal authority whatsoever. There is no legitimate HOA board, because according to the bylaws I wrote, no board can exist without my approval as majority stakeholder. I turned to face Patricia directly. Everything you've done for the past 2 months has been fraud. Every fee you've collected, every violation you've issued, every claim of authority you've made, all of it has been criminal impersonation of official capacity. The room erupted. Voices rose in confusion, anger, disbelief. I saw Eleanor Walsh in the third row, her face pale, but her eyes blazing with understanding. The Hendersons were staring at Patricia like they'd never seen her before. But Patricia wasn't done fighting. "Lies!" she screamed, rushing back to the podium. "This is exactly what I warned you about. He's trying to intimidate you with fake documents and legal intimidation. I have been protecting this community from people like him." That's when Tom Rodriguez stood up, opening his laptop. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm a forensic accountant specializing in financial fraud. Over the past week, I've traced Patricia Hendricks' activities across 4 states and 15 years. She is a serial con artist who has defrauded elderly residents in multiple communities using exactly the same tactics she's employed here." The projector screen lit up with Patricia's criminal history court records, police reports, victim statements from Arizona, Colorado, Washington. The room fell silent as people absorbed the documentation of a predator who'd been systematically targeting vulnerable communities for over a decade. Patricia stood frozen at the podium, watching her carefully constructed kingdom collapse in real time. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost all its authoritative bluster. This is all fabricated. They're trying to frame me because I exposed their criminal activities. I'm the victim here." Marcus Chen stood up next, his briefcase open to reveal stacks of legal documents. "Mrs. Hendricks, you are under investigation by the State Attorney General for elder fraud, by the County Sheriff for assault and filing false reports, and by the Federal Postal Service for mail fraud. As of this morning, there are warrants for your arrest in 3 states. The silence in that room was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop on the hardwood floor. Patricia looked around desperately, searching for support among the people who'd believed her lies. But the faces staring back at her had changed completely. Where there had been trust and admiration, now there was horror and disgust. "You don't understand," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I was protecting you. I was keeping this community safe from people who want to destroy what you've built." I stepped forward, letting her see the full weight of what she'd brought down on herself. "Patricia, you attacked my pregnant wife. You terrorized elderly residents into paying fake fees they couldn't afford. You filed false police reports and tried to destroy my family's reputation with fabricated evidence. You turned neighbors against each other with lies and fear." I looked around the room at faces I'd known for 15 years, people who'd trusted Patricia's authority because they wanted to believe in community protection and proper governance. But most of all, you tried to steal something that doesn't belong to you. This community exists because people chose to build something beautiful together. You tried to turn that into your personal kingdom built on fear and lies. The police sirens in the distance were getting closer. Patricia Hendricks made one final mistake that night. She tried to run. As the first police cruiser pulled into the community center parking lot, Patricia gathered up her fake documents and bolted for the back exit. But she'd forgotten that I knew every inch of Pine Ridge, including the fact that the rear door led directly to a dead-end maintenance area surrounded by a 6-foot fence I'd designed to keep wildlife away from the building. The sight of this woman who'd terrorized my community for months, scrambling over garbage cans in a business suit while wearing high heels, would have been comical if it weren't so pathetic. Deputy Marshall found her crouched behind the dumpster, frantically trying to delete files from her phone. "Patricia Hendricks, you're under arrest for assault, fraud, elder abuse, and filing false police reports," he announced, his voice carrying back through the open door to where the entire community was watching in stunned silence. As they led her away in handcuffs, Patricia's facade finally cracked completely. The authoritative community protector disappeared, replaced by a snarling, desperate woman whose true nature was finally visible to everyone she'd fooled. "You people are idiots," she screamed at the crowd gathered in the doorway. "I was the only one protecting you from criminals and freeloaders. Without me, this place will be overrun by thugs and drug dealers. You'll be begging me to come back." Even in defeat, even facing multiple felony charges, Patricia Hendricks couldn't admit she was wrong. In her twisted worldview, she was still the victim, still the misunderstood hero being persecuted by ungrateful people too stupid to appreciate her protection. That delusion would cost her dearly. The aftermath of Patricia's arrest was swift and devastating. Within 24 hours, residents from her previous scam locations had seen the news coverage and contacted authorities with additional evidence. The woman who'd claimed to be protecting Pine Ridge was facing charges in 4 states totaling over $50,000 in fraudulent collections from elderly victims. But Patricia's story didn't end with that first arrest. 3 weeks later, while out on bail and supposedly awaiting trial, she made the catastrophic decision to return to Pine Ridge for one final act of revenge. "I was working in my home office when Sarah called out from the kitchen, her voice tight with fear. 'Dave, there's someone in our driveway.' I looked out the window to see Patricia's car parked sideways across our driveway, blocking us in. She was standing beside it with what looked like a crowbar in her hand, staring up at our house with the kind of vacant intensity that made my blood run cold. This wasn't the calculated manipulator who'd fooled half the community for months. This was someone who'd completely lost touch with reality. I called 911 while moving Sarah away from the windows, but Patricia wasn't waiting for another confrontation. She was already walking toward our front door, that crowbar raised like a weapon. "David Davidson?" she screamed, her voice echoing off the mountain walls. "You destroyed my life. You turned everyone against me. I was protecting this community, and you ruined everything." The sound of splintering wood told me she'd started trying to break down our door. But Patricia had forgotten that Pine Ridge was a tight-knit community of people who looked out for each other. Her screaming had alerted every neighbor within half a mile, and they were already responding. Jim Morrison arrived first, followed by Tom Rodriguez and 3 other neighbors, all carrying everything from baseball bats to hunting rifles. The sight of 6 armed residents surrounding her car finally penetrated Patricia's rage-fueled delusion. "You can't do this to me," she wailed, dropping the crowbar and backing toward her vehicle. "I have rights. I was elected president. This is my community." "Patricia," Jim said quietly, his hunting rifle held casually but ready, "you need to get in your car and leave. Right now." But instead of fleeing, Patricia did something that sealed her fate forever. She pulled out her phone and started recording, convinced she could still manipulate the narrative. "This is Patricia Hendricks, legitimate HOA president of Pine Ridge Mountain Community," she announced to her phone camera. "I'm being threatened by armed vigilantes who are protecting criminal trespassers. I'm documenting this illegal intimidation for law enforcement and the media." That video would become Exhibit A in her felony menacing trial. When the police arrived 10 minutes later, they found Patricia still ranting into her phone about criminal conspiracies and community corruption, while 6 neighbors stood guard to protect my pregnant wife from a woman wielding a crowbar. This time, there was no bail. The judge who reviewed Patricia's case, her assault on Sarah, the fraud charges, the violation of her bail conditions, and now armed breaking and entering with intent to harm, declared her a clear and present danger to community safety. "Mrs. Hendricks," he said, during her sentencing hearing, "you have demonstrated a complete inability to accept responsibility for your actions and a persistent pattern of targeting vulnerable individuals for financial exploitation. Your delusion that you are the victim in these circumstances makes you unsuitable for release into any community setting. Patricia got 8 years in state prison, with additional federal charges pending for the mail fraud associated with her fake violation notices. But even from prison, she tried one final gambit. 6 months after her conviction, I received a certified letter from a lawyer claiming to represent Patricia in a civil suit against me for defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and conspiracy to deny civil rights. The lawsuit claimed that I had orchestrated an elaborate frame up to destroy an innocent woman who was only trying to maintain community standards. It demanded $2.3 million in damages for her destroyed reputation and lost career opportunities. Marcus Chen's response was a work of art. Mrs. Hendricks appears to be continuing her pattern of filing fraudulent legal documents from her prison cell, he wrote to her attorney. We look forward to presenting her complete criminal history, including documented evidence of identical scams in 3 other states, to any jury foolish enough to hear this frivolous case. The lawsuit was withdrawn within a week. Patricia's lawyer, who'd apparently taken the case without thoroughly researching her background, sent an apologetic letter explaining that he'd been misled about the nature of the underlying dispute and would no longer be representing her. Even her final attorney had abandoned her when he realized the truth about who Patricia Hendricks really was. Today, as I write this story, my daughter Emma is 3 years old and running through the same mountain trails where her mother was once attacked by a woman who thought power came from intimidation and fear. Emma doesn't know that our peaceful community was once terrorized by someone who nearly cost her her life before she was even born. She just knows Pine Ridge as a place where neighbors look out for each other, where elderly residents like Eleanor Walsh teach her about gardening, and where community meetings are about planning block parties, not exposing serial criminals. The community Patricia tried to tear apart with lies and fear became stronger than it had ever been before. The residents who'd been manipulated by her manufactured authority learned valuable lessons about questioning claims that seemed too convenient, too urgent, or too demanding of immediate compliance without proper verification. Eleanor Walsh, who'd been terrified into paying Patricia's fake violation fees, became an advocate for elderly residents' rights and now runs workshops teaching seniors how to identify and report financial scams. The $700 Patricia stole from her was recovered from frozen bank accounts, but Eleanor says the education she provides to other potential victims is worth far more than money. Mrs. Chen's rose garden is more beautiful than ever, and she's never received another fake violation notice. The Hendersons apologized repeatedly for believing Patricia's lies and now host an annual barbecue to celebrate community unity. Even Mrs. Patterson, who'd been among Patricia's most devoted supporters, admitted she'd been fooled by someone who understood exactly how to exploit people's genuine desire for safety and order. The fake HOA presidency Patricia claimed was replaced by a legitimate community association with elected representatives, proper oversight, and transparent financial reporting. Everything Patricia pretended to offer: community protection, property value preservation, neighborhood standards, we now have through honest, accountable governance. Patricia herself remains in state prison, serving her 8-year sentence with additional federal charges still pending. According to court records, she spent her incarceration filing unsuccessful appeals, claiming prosecutorial misconduct, and attempting to represent herself in various lawsuits against everyone from the prison system to former neighbors who testified against her. She still maintains her innocence. She still believes she was the victim of an elaborate conspiracy designed to destroy someone who was only trying to protect vulnerable communities from dangerous criminals. Some people are so invested in their own victimhood that they'll choose delusion over accountability every single time. But here's what I learned from those terrifying months when Patricia Hendricks nearly destroyed everything my family had worked to build. Bullies and con artists almost always target people they believe are powerless to fight back. Patricia chose our community because it was peaceful, trusting, and populated by elderly residents who respected authority. She chose to attack my family because she thought we were weekend visitors with no real connections or resources to resist her intimidation. Her fundamental miscalculation wasn't just about who I was professionally, it was about underestimating what ordinary people will do when someone threatens their family, their community, and their sense of basic human decency. Patricia had run similar scams successfully for over a decade because her previous victims were isolated, frightened, and convinced that fighting back would only make their situation worse. She counted on people being too embarrassed to admit they'd been fooled, too scared of escalation to seek help, and too unfamiliar with the legal system to challenge her manufactured authority. But Pine Ridge was different because I made it different. When Patricia targeted my pregnant wife, she didn't just assault Sarah. She declared war on someone who had the knowledge, resources, and absolute determination to fight back effectively. The most dangerous thing about people like Patricia Hendricks isn't their capacity for deception or intimidation. It's their ability to convince victims that resistance is hopeless, that authority figures can't be questioned, and that speaking up will only bring more punishment. Every bully, every scammer, every person who uses fake authority to exploit others is counting on their victim's silence and compliance. They need you to believe that they're more powerful than they actually are, that fighting back is more dangerous than submission, and that you're alone in your struggle against their abuse. Patricia Hendricks thought she'd found the perfect target in a quiet mountain community full of trusting, elderly residents and weekend visitors. What she actually found was a community of people who, when threatened, stood together against someone who mistook fear for respect and isolation for vulnerability. If you're dealing with someone who's using intimidation, fake authority, or fraudulent claims to control your life, remember this: bullies always seem more powerful than they actually are, right up until the moment someone calls their bluff with evidence, witnesses, and legal consequences. Patricia spent months building a kingdom of fear in Pine Ridge, convinced she was untouchable. It took exactly one community meeting to reduce her empire to rubble and send her to prison where she belonged. Don't let anyone convince you that standing up to abuse is more dangerous than accepting it. Sometimes the person terrorizing you is just waiting for someone brave enough to turn on the lights and show everyone else who they really are. And if my family's story has taught you anything about dealing with HOA Karens, property scammers, or anyone else who thinks they can intimidate you into submission, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about what happens when bullies finally meet their match. Because trust me, there are a lot more Patricia Hendricks out there, and they all need to learn the same lesson. When you attack innocent people, eventually you're going to pick the wrong target.